What's up, Andrew?
Hey guys, how you doing?
Doing great. You look great. We both have mustaches. Why does yours work and mine does not? What? All right, Andrew, can you just tell the audience who may be new to the show who you are, what you do to live, thrive, and survive? Why you're qualified to talk about this, because God knows I'm not. I'm wearing an Irish tin whistle and sunglasses right now. Tell us what's up.
Yeah, I'm Andrew Herrera, the president of Herrera Strategy. I've been an organizer on the Southwest side, which is almost wholly encompassed by the 4th Congressional District, for fucking 12 years now, which is kind of crazy. Just keep getting older. And then, and Herrera Strategy is a full-service public affairs firm. It's a fully progressive firm. We push progressive policies. We support progressive organizations and running their campaigns and getting attention around them. So I've been working with a lot of these folks to protect immigrants, protect workers, protect the environment, all that stuff for a long time now. So pretty enmeshed in all of this.
Yeah, Andrew's a pretty talented guy who could definitely be making a lot more money for easier ways, but instead he's chosen the life of... She's like Meg. They're both incredibly talented people that could be cashing in on their skill set by like doing horrible things.
True. You know what? I'm throwing in the towel. It's time. It's time to sell out, guys.
Your vacation home.
Announcement.
Go do some evil shit for a while. Come on. Come on. No, Andrew's great people. He's great. We come from the same... Actually, we come from like the same neighborhood, and then we ended up living in the same neighborhood for a while, and we had no idea. We hung out in Philly, which is an entirely different planet.
Met in Philly and realized we grew up next to each other, and then we lived next to each other for most of the decade.
That's what's up, dude. That's why Chicago's great. Tee up the 4th Congressional District race right now and why it is drawn, I think it's drawn national attention because the Democrats were talking about it when it first kind of emerged, the drama.
Yeah, because they tried to do something. Censure.
So I'll give you guys a quick rundown. So in Chicago, the machine, people talk about the Chicago machine still. It doesn't really exist, not like it used to. And so what they used to always do is if you had a really strong progressive in city council who was kind of making problems for everybody and it was talented enough and was talented enough to like basically give Mayor Daley and Speaker Madigan or whomever else heartburn, they would banish them to Congress basically. So they'd promote them out of their hair. The old expression used to be and so they would say about like aldermen and stuff, they say, send him to Congress. Alderman is far too important because the alderman was the most important cog in the Democratic Party machine. They're the ones who were tasked with all the turnout, the electoral turnout. And that's what the Democratic Party kind of ran off of. And so
just a quick thing for people who aren't from Chicago who are definitely going to find this interesting. Aldermen are like city council members. They represent the individual municipalities within the city. Chicago's a city of neighborhoods, and each neighborhood has an alder person. When Andrew's talking about the Chicago machine, he means the political machine. It's called the Windy City, not because of the wind, but because of all the noise politicians have made over the years. And if you hear him talk about Mike Madigan, he's referring to Mike Madigan, whose best friend, Fast Eddie Verdoliak. Him and Mike Madigan committed several crimes that would make Buddy Cianci of Providence, Rhode Island blush. I think Mike Madigan is now in jail, and he's referring to
I didn't know this about him.
Yeah,
I didn't know any of this.
In the Daily Political Machine, which is based in Bridgeport, south of the city, about 30 blocks. It's where like Irish Catholic city workers work, and that's kind of where Mayor Daley, the old man, and his son, that was kind of the base of their political power. There's a ton of interesting characters. Like, for sure, all of these guys are expert political manipulators.
Well, and the interesting thing, too, if anyone's ever interested in this, they should read the book called Boss by Mike Royko. It's not very long, and it's very entertaining. Royko is a legendary Sun-Times journalist from the city.
Love him.
And so, it's worth a read. And anyway, all of the history of Chicago machine politics. Anyway, so basically what we had in the 80s in Chicago, and bear with me for a second, is that the Latinos kind of broke through into the political establishment for the first time, in that we had our first ever people elected. And so the first two independent Latino aldermen were Chuy García and Luis Gutierrez. And so Luis Gutierrez was like, straight communist. He's all about like independence for Puerto Rico. He's Puerto Rican. The general divide in Chicago too is like Latinos on the Northwest side historically were predominantly Puerto Rican, and Southwest side is predominantly Mexican. Through the 90s and this huge waves of Mexican immigration that was driven by NAFTA, the whole city became more Mexican. So it's like less of a pronounced divide these days. But Luis Gutierrez was like the king of Puerto Rican Chicago, and Chuy was the one for
for Mexican Chicago. And so that divide has kind of, persisted and blah, blah. Louis, they sent him to Congress. I forget when. It was sometime in the 90s. They sent it to Congress by creating the 4th Congressional District. And the 4th Congressional District, so that's Division Street right there with the big Puerto Rican flag.
Yeah, big Puerto Rican flag. That's Humboldt Park. Go to Humboldt Park.
So if you actually looked up not worth doing right now, but if you look up the old 4th Congressional District map, it looks like a straight horseshoe. The new one is a little bit less horseshoey because they created the 3rd Congressional District out of it, which is Delia Ramirez's district. So those are the two biggest, highest proportion Latino voters on the entire state. And the thing was, back in the day, like in the 80s, when we still enforced the Voting Rights Act, they would create these majority minority districts, and because minority voters, for many reasons, vote at lower levels than white voters, you would pack the district with like 70% voters of that ethnicity, and then it was basically guaranteed that you'd get an elected from that ethnicity. So what's happened now is they've kind of diluted it a little bit. So we have 60% or somewhere around there, majority Latino districts and 3 and 4. And so that's kind of like the general context. Like that's why 4 matters a lot for Latino voters. It was the first Latino congressional district ever in the state of Illinois. It is still a majority Latino district, and it encompasses a lot of the areas. If you look at the map there, you've got Cicero, and then if you go like south from there, it's Berwyn, and then east into that is Chicago and all like Latino Chicago neighborhoods. That is probably the most impacted part of the city from the recent ice raids, including Brookfield, and then following I-55 up on both sides of the river. It's very, very heavily Latino. And so we're getting hammered right now with ICE and with a lot of other things that are really impacting the Latino community.
Yeah, that makes sense. So this is Berwyn, this is Cicero, this is like Midway Airport's down here.
That's
Cool.
like literally when I would do ICE patrol, it was like just right there.
Yeah, and we have Broadview also. It's in the 4th Congressional District.
So the big scandal, right, is that Chuy went and he just declined to file his nominating petitions. So every candidate has to collect signatures when they're running for office, and they collect a certain number of signatures, and it allows them to run for office as a member of the Democratic Party, right? So they can run in the Democratic primary. And there's deadlines for everything, ballot. And so Chuy, he didn't submit the petitions that he collected. So he basically chose at the last minute not to apply to be on the ballot. And instead, Chuy García, no relation, who was his chief of staff, she did submit petitions, right? And so what you have there is that everyone's saying, oh, this was a switcheroo.
I just want to get into the mechanics of the scam, because if you don't know, it's not a scam. It's just a very ham-fisted way of circumventing. So basically, my understanding of the situation is that in order for you to get on a ballot, you need to meet a certain amount of signatures on a petition by a deadline. And it takes time to get, say, 10,000 signatures from constituents in order to get on the ballot. Now, if somebody was going to retire, say, and waited up until the deadline to petition, to file, and that person didn't announce until the deadline, the petition deadline, that means that no one would be petitioning to get on the ballot because you think you're going to be up against somebody who's been in office for 30 years. What's the point, right? So by waiting, Chuy could have possibly told his staffer, hey, I'm going to wait to announce my retirement. You have time to petition quietly. And then he can drop off of the ballot, and then she will file the petition, and she may not have to run against people. I mean, that seems like legal, though. It seems like kind of.
It is all legal. And like, there's no, the thing is saying, well, they didn't tell anybody, but it's like, you're not required to put out a press release saying that you're, circulating. Right. And you are circulating in public. And so look, I think I've been on both sides of this, right? I remember when Senator Tony Munoz did the same thing, and on the last day, it used to be that you would just like resign from office, particularly for state office, and then the committeeman would just appoint somebody and then like appoint their son or something like that. That's so frowned on now that even though it's technically like still legally possible, they just don't do it anymore. What I would say is the optics on this are not great, because you want to say, oh, we want to have a robust competitive primary, all these kinds of things. And then where it gets kind of weird is this, I forget how Marie, what's her name?
Gluesenkamp.
Gluesenkamp Perez. Yeah. Gluesenkamp, something like that.
She's wild, man. She's like a MAGA Democrat. I have no fucking idea where she's at.
She's very APAC crazy. Yeah.
Pro-ICE.
She's like the one who always votes with Republicans, like her and Claire.
She dresses like Fetterman. She behaves like Fetterman, and politically, she's exactly like Fetterman. I mean, if you look at her, you think, oh, that's not Fetterman, and then you hear her talk, move, think and you're like, it's John Fetterman.
Only
Wait, can I
10
just say
years.
something about what you before about Chuy? I used to live in Chuy's district in the 4th district for 6 years. Chuy was a great representative. Like I could call his office for constituent services, ask him about different things that were happening. His people knew what was going on. It seemed like they were interested to talk to us. So, and politically, I'm very aligned with what Chuy's about. So I'm also kind of torn on this whole thing.
I think it's a really important point, Steve, is that, Chuy, not only was he the first Latino who was assassinated, and then Chuy was the second Mexican-American alderman. And, Chuy broke the deadlock in the council wars when he was appointed. He was a big ally of Harold Washington. He's always been, a mainstay of progressive politics, even in like the dark days of the 90s when progressives couldn't win anything. And even the early 2000s, Chuy was always the one holding it down. He's dedicated his entire career to public service. If you walk anywhere around on the Southwest side, people love Chuy because people know that he's been fighting for them for 40 years. He's been knocking on the doors. I would talk to old ladies, the senoras would like, oh, Chuy helped me carry my bags, my groceries to my car 15, 20 years ago. Like that kind of thing, and a real kind of example of servant leadership, and somebody who has truly given his life to his community. And then, his stated reason for dropping out was, I know to be true, which is that his doctor said that his heart was in bad shape. He couldn't deal with the constant stress. He had a child who passed, and so he's raising his grandchild, and his wife has kind of a chronic condition that's requiring increasing treatment. So,
Wait, there's an elderly person in the Congress who's actually taking care of their family instead of living out their days in office?
Right.
What?
And, with all the discourse around that's something that is being swept under the rug here. And people, I think, are being particularly callous about it. These people are still human beings, right? And so he's making a very difficult decision to walk away from his career at one of the moments of greatest need that his community has ever faced. And also, everyone knows the reason people don't retire from Congress is because the longer you're there, you get seniority and you get access to like committee chairmanships and all these other things. And so we actually lose power by him walking away. It's a very difficult decision for him to have made. And he made the decision to be with his family after a lifetime of putting his community before family many times. A deeply personal decision, and one that I personally don't feel like I'm in any position to judge. And honestly, I would hope that I would make the same decision if I were him.
Yeah.
And so, to be splitting hairs about the exact timing of this, I think is callous. And what kind of drives me nuts about this, Chuy also has been one of the greatest allies of Palestine for 40 years. He has always been on the side of Palestinian justice and liberation, always. And he's also been one of the people who's reached across the aisle to make sure that, Black and Latino Chicago are able to stand together. He's the one who's been for criminal justice reform. He's the one who's been with our Black brothers and sisters. He has helped bring up an entire generation of Latino leaders who see our interests is deeply and inextricably intertwined with the interests of Black working people as well. And so, which is particularly important on the Southwest side, where we have a lot of communities that overlap in a very segregated city like Chicago. And so, like, all of this is so important. And there's just the deepest irony is that we have Byron, who is is somebody who is very loudly and performatively in favor of Palestinian rights. And he says a lot of things that many of us agree with in the most kind of performative and disruptive way possible. And many of us see that and say like, oh yeah, like absolutely. Like here's somebody who's really fighting the fight, who's not afraid of power, what have you. But then because of Byron has also been like a long time opponent of Chuy's. He's very...
Just to get everybody who's caught up, just so everybody knows, this is the independent who's running against Chuy. His name's Byron Sigcho-Lopez, and he's running against Patty Garcia. The tension here, which is that, Chuy has been a long time Palestinian ally. He's been an ally of the community. He's done a lot to build bridges. And to your point, his district has been disproportionately affected by ICE persecution and torture people. And so since he's got a senior seat in the Senate, where the stakes are highest, especially when you need seniority to exercise power, he made this difficult decision on behalf of personal crisis. And that's a lot of that context is being stripped out of the conversation cynically, I would argue, just as an outsider looking at the race from the outside in. I just kind of want to...
Great.
You got a guy who everybody who's progressive agrees that Palestine should be free. And everybody who's progressive agrees that, like, when somebody is a true servant of their community, they know when it's right to step down. And part of your community is your family. Like, my argument is that, like, Chuck Schumer doesn't give a shit about our future. because if he gave a shit about our future, he would be spending his with his grandkids. Chuck Schumer cares about his career. The same way we criticize Ruth Bader Ginsburg because she knew that she could die in office and we would lose political power as a result of her putting her health first. And I think Chuy did make the right call here. He's made a lot of community sacrifices for his community. He is really a servant leader. I knew a lot of people in Pilsen who knew him personally. So it's really disappointing for me to see someone who purports to be this progressive voice and has been cynically attacking a lifelong progressive who was a progressive in Chicago as a Latino man when it was unsafe to be a Latino progressive leader.
His best friend was literally assassinated. And for holding public office. And, they say it was a random gang shooting. Okay, gang members don't break into your living room and just shoot you in cold blood. And so, you look at all these things and I think there's an ahistorical kind of view of this. I know people are very heated right now. There's an impatience. There's basically this feeling that if anybody's been in public office for long enough that they're bad. And we forget that we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, and any of the progressive movement, there are people who have broken ground, and people forget that the first black alderman was also murdered. The first independent black alderman was murdered. And so we've always had to pay a price for breaking through into the halls of power. And Chuy was one of the very first ones to do so. And so I think that's really important for us to keep in view. We have this race happening now. And I think there's a few funny narratives out of this, right? First of all, there's a Republican candidate who's running. I forget her name. The Republicans don't matter in the fourth.
It's
whatever. And then
nice try.
His name is Chris Getty, right? And Chris Getty, his dad was also the mayor of Lyons. Lyons is kind of old white, the white ethnic machine still exists out there, Lyons, Berwyn, Cicero, those kinds of places, still run by those old crews. And the thing is, he went and got his 10,000 signatures, right? And so while Myra and Byron are complaining about how this is voter suppression, Chris Getty didn't complain at all. He went and got his 10,000 signatures. They were all good, and that's it, right? And then Ed Hershey is running as the working class party candidate. So it's a different party, it's a different party line, and he went and ran. And now the thing is that with Ed Hershey and with this Republican lady, they're just fuck it, whoever runs, we're gonna run. Ed is running against Chuy multiple times. From the rhetoric that you're hearing from Byron that Chuy is the fucking devil, he's blah, 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 blah. You would think that, well, if he's so bad, why wouldn't you just run against him, Why wouldn't you run against him in the primary? Why wouldn't you run against him as an independent? Well, or as a third party candidate?
That's a great question, yeah.
So why wouldn't you run? Myra is the same way. Myra barely even lives here. She's somebody who spent she grew up here, but then she moved to DC. She spent her entire career in DC, and she moved back here to run for office, right? And so it's okay, but our communities do value people who have put in the work over the years and have been part of our community.
When you're talking about this spot in Chicago, at least the part where I lived in, it's important that you come from your community because people see these communities where marginalized people live, where working class people live, and they see opportunity to exploit and to buy up housing and buy up property. There's constantly this push from real estate developers and all these people that see money and opportunity in places where people have lived for 30, 40, 50, 60 years, multiple generations. So having somebody to represent your community that can fend off a lot of these interests is important. There's a lot at stake in these places because there's a lot of people that see dollar signs and forget about the history.
Right. And I think the other thing to note here is that you're looking at, and look, I don't know Myra very well. She seems like good people. But you're looking at somebody who's coming from the outside, all of the money, she raised a substantial amount of money for an independent run very quickly. And then she spent over $100,000 in signature collection. So the narrative out there is we knocked all these doors. Oh, well, you paid somebody to knock all those doors, right? And I've been doing this for a long time too. And so the question of the signature review is basically the process is you submit the required number of signatures. You usually want to triple the signatures that you're supposed to get because if you do that, then no matter how many are seen as kind of not good signatures, then you're pretty much safe. And so they submitted 17,000, the 10,000 was the required number. And then you look at that though, and you're seeing pages of signatures that were clearly, the signature is identical all the way down the page, so different names, the same signature. And it's very common, so that they call a pattern of fraud. So they'll disqualify batches.
of signatures because they can tell that there's one person who's getting paid per signature, right? So somebody will get paid $3 per signature or something like that. And so you basically have 20 names on a sheet. You're getting paid $60 per sheet. And instead of going out and collecting those names, they just write them all down themselves. They go through a voter roll, they write them all down, and they sign for all of them, right?
Yeah.
That is a common thing that happens.
That's the oldest trick in the book, bro. It's like going to the graveyard to find votes. Come on.
Right. And the thing is, that's what happens when you pay people, because
right.
now your campaign has to actually check to verify. And if you don't have a buttoned up operation, somebody's just going to hand you a sheet. You're going to hand them the money. That's it. They're gone. And you've got a fraudulent piece of paper, right?
Right. Because some dude like, I can get 100 signatures in 3 hours and make $300, or I can make $300 by writing 100 signatures from the voter rolls in
10 minutes.
Like, it's just that's why it's bad incentives. Bad incentives lead to bad results, which is why when you're out and you just got people volunteering on the strength of like your what you can do for them if they help you, that's why you get the best results. Keep going. My bad. This is all interesting, so I'm getting excited, but I have bad etiquette.
No, this is great. And so, you know, almost 90% of the $300,000 of my IRAs came from outside of Illinois, not even just the district. And
wait, 90% of the $270,000 came from outside of the state of Illinois.
Yeah, and so it makes sense because all of her professional connections are DC connections, and so they'll be around the country. But DC money is either from DC or it's from New York or it's from another major political hub. It's not really going to be from Chicago. And so, you look at all of that and you're like, okay. And at the same time, you have Byron has even worse signatures, right? And so Byron is not somebody who like really rolls up his sleeves and does a lot of the door knocking himself. But we have a lot of our friends in DSA and PSL and other kinds of organizations are very animated, and they really believe in his candidacy, and that's fine. But what you end up having is like a very kind of disjointed signature collection process, where you'll have, sometimes if you're standing outside grocery stores and things like that, or bus stops, you're going to get people from all over the place.
Right.
And so again, there's this question of like, oh, it's voter disenfranchisement. It's not voter disenfranchisement. If there's, and this is a true thing, like there are people who are signing whose address was in Texas, right? And it's being submitted. And it's like, but a Texan does not have a right to representation in Illinois' 4th congressional district.
Nah.
So that's not voter disenfranchisement. In fact, it would be disenfranchising 4th congressional district voters if you allowed that person in Texas to decide who our representative is going to be. That's disenfranchisement.
That's true disenfranchisement, because they don't got they don't have any skin in the game.
Right. Everyone had the opportunity to run. Everyone could have run, right? Not only could they have run, multiple people did run before Chuy announced anything. And then even after the announcement was made, a white guy from Lions somehow got 10,000 good signatures. And these two Latino challengers, not because they're Latino, it's because one's an outsider who's never run an election before, and one's kind of, not a process guy, let's say that kindly. And so you have like this messy process.
Man. You're a class act, bro. I'm not a process guy, I'm a laughs guy, but
you look at that whole situation. The unfortunate part of all of this is that Chuy, after a lifetime of service to his constituents, to the Palestinian people, to fighting for human rights broadly and consistently and coherently, is now being attacked by many people on the side of Palestinian liberation because a Zionist attacked him in Congress. Like for a Zionist calling for his censure on the House floor triggered a bunch of local Palestinian supporters to call him, all kinds of horrible things. And to me is very unfortunate. And honestly, deeply hurtful. I've been in that cause. I've been in all the other lefty causes for a long time. And, it's really frustrating when it became inconvenient for us, for others, that Chuy was running for mayor, all of a sudden, Chuy and all Latino progressives on the Lower West Side were anti-Black, even though we've all organized with our Black brothers and sisters all the time. When it becomes convenient or inconvenient for people who wrap themselves in a keffiyeh, then all of a sudden we're anti-Palestinian. And, without regard for all of the work that we've done and the blood, sweat, and tears that we have actually shed to advance these causes alongside people who are really meaningfully doing the work. And anybody who's really meaningfully doing the work understands that we have been there every step of the way. And so I'm not Chuy, but I can say that we broadly are being maligned for, being kind of part of a corrupt machine, a corrupt process, a corrupt this and that, when all I can say is that Patty Garcia is somebody who You were talking about, Steve, that Chuy's district office has always been very responsive. I know that Chuy's district office would frequently field immigration case requests for the neighboring congressional districts, for Danny Davis's office, for Bobby Rush's district. And so they actually had the largest caseload of any district office. And they were the ones who were working overtime to do that. And in that office, I have not seen anybody who's worked harder than Patty Garcia. And so when it comes to the level of actually doing the work, of actually being there for the constituents, of actually getting things done, Patty's the one who's served at every single level of that operation and has supported all of the local progressive electeds to help make sure that people don't realize how much we have flipped the southwest side of Chicago progressive in the past 10 years. I got very lucky because, the folks that I learned from, you lost for 20 years, from like the early 90s to the mid 2010s. And then all of a sudden I got involved in like 2015, and it just so happened we started winning every single race. But that was the product of them fighting for 25 years without anything to show for it.
It's progressive, and anything worth fighting for, you never lose, you only learn, right?
Right. That's a great way to
all those quote unquote losses were not losses. We learn, we build. That's what I was telling our mutual friend who took one in an election. I was like, listen, like, we know more now. It's like they left it better than they found it. You pick it up where they put it down and you keep moving it forward. That's why, like, it's cool that you learn from people who basically didn't have the whole like W next to their name and the D in the Senate or whatever, but like they like left it so that you could pick up the torch.
And our whole generation of organizers, and that work was critical, because otherwise we'd be starting from scratch right now and we'd be in a much worse position, and we're already not in a great position. I think ultimately this whole thing comes down to, like, you can be upset about whatever. Anyone's entitled to their feelings and opinions, right? I just think that it becomes damaging and unconstructive when lefties are punching at lefties and saying that we're not really lefties. I mean, I've been seeing people on Twitter and Instagram saying, like, Patty and Chuy are fascists. What are you smoking? Like, how are we throwing these words around? And these words have no meaning if you're going to start saying things like that. There can always be a cleaner process. People can always, make major life decisions on the timeline that we prefer, and they can roll things out in a different way. But also at the end of the day, if you're really, and particularly the folks who are like most up in arms about this, I think are also the same kinds of folks who are saying, well, you should primary everybody, right? Okay, well, if you're primarying everybody, just fucking primary him.
Steve, to bring it back to the New York Times piece that you pulled up earlier about how DSA is, responsible for a lot of gentrification or ignoring like the actual community's needs. I think this is kind of a good example of where that perception comes from. Not to hate on our friends in the DSA, love all of them, but you can see with this example how that perception comes.
Yeah, all love to DSA, all love to everybody, and not to single anybody out. The challenge is that if you have a bunch of folks who are saying Chuy's a fucking Nazi, right? And you're telling the abuelos and the abuelas in the neighborhood, and you're telling their kids, you're telling people who, like, you don't understand. Like, I grew up with Chuy as a household name, right? And Chuy was like synonymous with like the guy who didn't sell out, like the one elected that we could trust, like my entire life, right? Before I ever met him. He has a greater significance to our community than people really understand. And now we've got a bunch of, like, mostly young folks, many of whom are not from the district, who are coming in and they're telling us that our person who has led us through our, dark days and good days and everything in between is actually a fascist because he did one thing at the end of his 40-year career that they didn't like. And it's a procedural thing that is not impacting anybody's cost of living, is not making it any easier for them to get through the day, is not solving immigration problems for them. What that does is actually discredits them entirely. And what it does is it splits off the part of this, like, very energetic activist base that's making these really extreme calls and pronouncements from the broader, body politic, which is, more concerned with making it to the end of the day. And the biggest problem we have in the 4th Congressional District is voter turnout and engagement. And anybody who thinks they're going to get higher voter turnout and engagement because you're going and saying democracy is dead in the 4th Congressional District and Byron Sigcho-Lopez is the only person who's going to say that because he's going to bring us to the Supreme Court, that's not going to help anybody, particularly because Byron's going to lose that challenge because he just, frankly, like, under the law, he didn't collect the required signatures. There was nothing stopping him from collecting the required signatures. He has enough organizers out there. The same is true for Byron. And so for both of those to be standing there and to be saying that, that democracy is dead, is that more likely to make somebody come out and vote for the first time who's scared of ICE, scared of everything that's happening right now, or more likely to suppress that vote and make them think that there's just no point in engaging anyway? And I haven't heard these people talk about any issues this entire time. They've only been talking about process and how wronged they have been personally. And I think that's it's just deeply damaging.
It's also very manipulative to voters too. It doesn't give them actually informed votes. What I'm saying is my own opinion, not reflective of anyone here. It is performing rage, because performing rage gets good feedback from lefties, and everybody's trying to take down the establishment. And it's very easy to be like the old guys, the establishment.
Because my opinion, Meg corrects it. So you can speak on behalf of me. I'm just being goofy today.
You are very goofy today.
Dude, Meg, you know me, man. I'm not even imbibing or anything. I'm just having a good time. I got my whole costume.